All right, what I want to talk about today is glycemic index. You hear me use it a lot in all my other videos, and you've heard the term kicked around a lot. I really want to dig into why it's important, explain what it is, and how it helps us think about food differently. So what glycemic index is, it is a measurement of how quickly sugars are absorbed from foods we eat into the bloodstream in 2 hours after we eat it. So I'm going to repeat that one more time. The glycemic index is how quickly sugars are absorbed into the bloodstream from foods we eat. All right, now let's move on to how it's calculated. So the way it's calculated is an individual is kept without food for 12 hours. And at that point, they're effectively fasting. After the individual has not had any food for 12 hours, they're given a test food at time 0, 50 grams of a test food at time 0. After the person eats 50 grams of that food at time 0, their blood sugar is checked every 15 minutes over the course of 2 hours. After the blood sugar values are plotted every 15 minutes over 2 hours, we get a little graph like that. After that graph is developed, the area under the curve, or AUC, area under the curve, is measured for that test food item for 2 hours. Then that food item or test food item is compared against the king of all sugars, which is none other than glucose. Glucose is the gold standard or king of all sugars because it is directly absorbed into the blood. It is the classic sugar that's the reference point in the body. That's the reference point of our body. Every single one of our cells knows how to metabolize glucose. It's directly absorbed into the bloodstream from the GI tract without any delay, and it's the sugar that's exclusively used by the brain. All right, so I'm going to bring both these into view so we can look at this. I'm going to switch them. There we go. So as you can see, if we plug glucose into this equation, we can see that glucose has a glycemic index of 100. So glucose against glucose, instead of the test food, we replace glucose. So area under the curve of glucose divided by area under the curve of glucose in the same individual will make this number right here 1. 1 times 100 is 100. So the glycemic index of glucose is 100, making it the reference point. So that means anything else we compare, any other test food, for example, an apple, 50 grams of an apple, 50 grams of white bread, will have a slower glycemic index than glucose because glucose is directly absorbed. It is the classic sugar, and it is the only sugar that can have a glycemic index of 100. Nothing can really be higher than glucose. So the closer the food is to 100, the higher the glycemic index, because it means it's matching the absorption rate of glucose, as you can see by this ratio right here. So I hope that helps you understand. If anything was confusing about what I explained, please leave questions in the comments below, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. And if it's still confusing, there are other videos and other explanations on this. So I hope that helps. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at this. These are examples of the glycemic index of different foods. Let it focus there. And we're going to go over how it refers to that of glucose, which is 100. Okay, so we'll start with the higher glycemic index foods, which are here at the bottom. And you see number 1 listed is glucose. Okay, high fructose corn syrup is another. And white potato has a glycemic index of 83. White bread actually has a glycemic index of 75. White rice actually has a glycemic index of 73. Cornflakes, I think, is 60 or 70, also is pretty high. And white potato is super high, I think it's actually mashed potato or baked potato is 83 and 86 respectively. But those are all food items with high glycemic index. Now, if you take a look at fructose, interestingly, fructose is in the category of low glycemic index, 55 or less. Why is that? Because fructose actually only has a glycemic index of 15. In 2 hours, fructose only spikes the blood glucose by 15. Now that's really important. I'm going to repeat that. Fructose only spikes the blood glucose by 15. And there's a reason by that. Fructose is not readily used by the body. It needs, in order for the body to store, use, or metabolize fructose, it needs to be first converted biochemically to glucose. So if you take a look at this chemical pathway here, it doesn't show the whole picture, but it has to actually go through this process to be converted to glucose. Now, that we can see based on this that it takes, since the actual glycemic index of fructose is 15, it almost takes 2 hours or more. Now, if you look at the medium range, white sugar or sucrose or table sugar is actually 50. Now, there's very good reason to that. I wish I had the picture for you, but what sucrose is actually one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose combined. So for every time you eat a molecule of sucrose, it needs to be absorbed into the body, then it's broken apart, and then half of it, meaning glycemic index of 50, plus some, which is 7, which gives sucrose, because 7 meaning half of fructose, which is 15, gives it a glycemic index of 57. And that makes perfect sense, because then you remember, you're absorbing sucrose, which is glucose plus fructose, you split it apart, then that glucose is the entire glycemic index, will be a perfect glycemic index of 50, so half of it gives you a perfect glycemic index, whereas the other half needs to sit around for an hour or two, and about 7 of it in 2 hours will be converted, so 57. That's why you see sucrose has a glycemic index of only 50, because half of it is fructose. Okay? And the same goes for fruit. Mostly in apples, oranges, all fruits, the sugars are split 50-50 between fructose and glucose. So if you can see the glycemic index of fruits, I don't know if they've listed banana. Banana is a very good example. The glycemic index, I believe, is around 50 something. So it's mainly because half of it's fructose, half of it's glucose, and the sugar, out of 100 grams of sugars in banana, half of it's about half of it's fructose, about half of it's glucose, giving it a glycemic index score of 50. Now, that goes to show that something like white bread or rice have really high glycemic index because they're highly refined carbohydrates that are quickly split into glucose by amylase and lipase in the saliva. So before it even hits your stomach, white bread is split into amylase and lipase, and then it's into glucose and is directly absorbed into the bloodstream from the GI tract, giving you a glycemic index of 75, which is really high. I want you guys to try this next time you have a piece of white bread. Just take a piece of white bread, roll it up into a ball, and chew it. Don't swallow it. Just keep chewing that piece of white bread for 5 minutes or so. You will see that as you chew it in your mouth, it'll go from tasting doughy and like bread to starting to taste sweet. And that's thanks to the amylase and lipase naturally found in your saliva, converting it to glucose. So that's something really interesting you can test at home. So one more thing I want to point out is that why is glycemic index important? So the whole reason this is important is because when you spike your blood sugar that quickly, it overwhelms the biochemical pathways of your body, and a lot of the sugars we eat have to go into alternate biochemical pathways while they overwhelm the natural biochemical pathways. So if you take fructose, for example, as you see, it's broken down, but look down here what it ends up to. It ends up to very low density lipoproteins, which we all know VLDL or LDL are the building blocks for atherosclerosis, and they're nicely labeled here triglycerides. So you can see sugars, when other biochemical pathways are overwhelmed, is converted into not cholesterol, but into triglycerides. And that too, the most notoriously bad triglyceride, very low density lipoprotein, or LDL or VLDL, which is responsible for inflammation, atherosclerosis, and eventually, on a long term, coronary artery disease and potentially heart attack. So we can see sugars, although not fat, and many products are advertised as low fat, but they're high glycemic index, which eventually gets you to triglycerides. So yes, you may not be eating a soda, may have no fat in it, but it is definitely adding triglycerides to your bloodstream in the form of LDL or VLDL, even worse than LDL, causing pro-inflammatory pathways to go and potentially causing atherosclerosis. So this is the whole reason, in my opinion, why glycemic index is super important and why we need to really pay attention to it. All right, well, I hope that gives you some insight. Please leave in the comments below if you have any questions about what I explained. I hope to go into this pathway in more detail and see the relationship between fructose and glucose. Please give it a thumbs up, again, if you liked it and you learned something. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see how this relates to our daily diet, how it impacts us. And I'm going to be including more of this. I'm going to try to include more of the glycemic index of actual food items I review within the reviews. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, and I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks again. Bye-bye.